A mail-order bride was left at the station with a baby, until a cowboy said, "Let me hold you both." The train screeched to a halt, steam curling around the wooden platform like ghosts in the cold Montana air. Passengers spilled out, clutching suitcases and scarves, voices mingling with the hiss of the locomotive. When the noise faded, one woman remained. Clara Whitmore stood near the edge of the platform, her gloved hands clutching a small bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. Inside, her baby stirred, a soft cry escaping into the wind. The letter in her pocket was creased and worn, read so many times she knew every word by heart. "My name is Thomas Reed. I have a ranch outside of Helena, and I seek a wife to share my home and my life. I don't mind if you have a child. Every soul deserves a family." She had believed those words. She needed to believe them. The train's whistle sounded again, long and lonely, as the conductor shouted, "All aboard! Last call." Clara turned in circles, her eyes scanning the small, snow-covered station. She expected to see a tall man with a brown hat and kind eyes, the man who'd written her letters, promising hope after the pain of widowhood. But there was no one. A station master stepped out of his booth, tugging his scarf tighter. "You lost, ma'am?" Clara hesitated, shifting her baby in her arms. I'm waiting for someone. Thomas Reed. He's supposed to meet me here." The man frowned. "Ain't seen no one by that name today." "You sure he's comin'?" Her voice broke. "He said he would." The train chugged away, taking with it the last of the passengers. The platform fell silent but for the soft whistle of wind and the baby's whimpering. The station master cleared his throat. "You're welcome to wait inside a bit, but the next train won't be here till morning." "Thank you," Clara whispered. She stepped into the tiny waiting room, where the air was stale and the potbelly stove barely gave off heat. She sat on a bench, rocking her baby gently, trying to quiet his cries. Her fingers were numb, her stomach empty. The baby, Samuel, suckled on his thumb, not understanding why his mother's eyes glistened with tears. She had sold everything to come here, her wedding band, her furniture, even her late husband's watch, to afford the train fare. Every mile she'd ridden, she'd whispered prayers that Montana would be a new beginning. Now, staring out through the frosted window, she saw only snow and shadows. An hour passed. Then two. Darkness fell, and the station lanterns flickered weakly against the gathering storm. Clara bundled Samuel tighter, humming a lullaby her mother once sang. The sound trembled on her lips. "Hush, little one, the angels keep you near." Her voice cracked halfway through. The door creaked open. The wind howled in behind a swirl of snow. The station master poked his head in. "Ma'am, if no one's comin', I'll be locking up soon. You got a place to stay?" Clara stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting. "I thought I did." He frowned. "Town's a mile up that road, but with that baby, and the storm comin' in." He didn't finish. "You didn't have to." She looked out again, empty tracks, snow falling thicker now, the world swallowed by white. She held her baby close, pressing her cheek to his soft head. "We'll be all right, sweetheart," she whispered, though her voice wavered. She thought of the promise Thomas Reed had made in his letters. "You won't be alone anymore." But she was. The wind slammed the door shut, rattling the glass. The lamps flickered. Clara sank back onto the bench, rocking her baby as the night closed in. Outside, the storm roared, and in the distance, through the blinding snow, a single horse's silhouette appeared. Its rider was tall, cloaked in a duster, his hat pulled low. He reined in at the edge of the platform, the horse snorting steam into the cold. From the window, Clara saw him dismount, his boots crunching over the snow. He lifted his gaze toward the station, toward her. And for the first time that night, Clara felt something stir inside her chest. Not fear. Not hope. Something in between, like the first spark of fire on frozen wood. The wind slammed against the door as Clara sat huddled inside the dim station. The lamp on the wall flickered, casting trembling shadows over the wooden floorboards. Then came the sound, boots crunching through snow. Slow, steady. A man's silhouette filled the doorway before he stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. He was tall, broad through the chest, his coat dusted white, his hat pulled low. For a heartbeat, Clara's breath caught. Could it be Thomas Reed at last? But when he looked up, she saw the truth. This man's face was rugged, his eyes the color of deep river water, kind, but weathered by years of wind and work. "Evenin', ma'am," he said softly, his voice low and warm, carrying the drawl of the open plains. "Didn't mean to startle you." Clara clutched her baby tighter. "You didn't?" "I just wasn't expecting anyone." He glanced around the empty station. "Looks like the train's long gone." You waitin' on someone? Her throat tightened. I was. The man's eyes dropped to the child in her arms. You travelin' alone? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I came to meet my husband. Or the man who was supposed to be. Something shifted in his expression. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. I see. The wind howled through the cracks of the door, sending a chill through the room. The baby whimpered. Without another word, the man crossed to the small iron stove and knelt beside it. He opened the hatch, fed in a few logs from the stack, and coaxed the flames to life. The light grew warm and gold, chasing back the cold. He turned slightly, glancing at her over his shoulder. Name's Luke Tanner. I was bringin' supplies from town when I saw the light in here. Didn't figure anyone be stuck this late, not in weather like this. Clara blinked back tears. Mr. Tanner, I don't know what to do. The man who wrote me, Thomas Reed, he never came. He promised me a home. Luke stood slowly, his hat still in his hand. Ma'am, I'm sorry to hear that. Montana's a hard country for good folks sometimes. He looked at the child again, his expression softening. Your little one, boy or girl? Boy, Clara whispered. His name is Samuel. Luke smiled faintly. That's a strong name. The baby fussed, tiny fists waving. Clara tried to quiet him, but her hands were trembling from cold and exhaustion. May I? Luke asked gently, nodding toward the child. She hesitated, clutching Samuel closer. I won't hurt him, he said quietly, voice low, as if speaking to a skittish colt. Just thought I might help. Something in his tone, steady, patient, safe, made her nod. Slowly she placed her son into his arms. Luke cradled the baby as though he'd done it 100 times before. His large, calloused hands supported the small bundle perfectly. Samuel stopped crying almost instantly. Clara stared, amazed. He never does that for anyone. Luke chuckled softly. Guess he just needed to know he's not alone. Babies can sense that. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, tears filling her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Luke looked up at her then, and for a moment, the noise of the storm outside faded away. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a man both strong and gentle, a man who carried his own sorrows quietly. You don't owe me nothin', ma'am, he said. But you can't stay here. Storm's settin' in hard. You'll freeze by morning. Clara's heart pounded. Where would I go? I don't know a soul here. Luke shifted Samuel back into her arms carefully, like handing over something precious. His voice was low but sure when he said, Then let me hold you both, till we figure this out. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. He pulled his duster coat from the chair and draped it around her shoulders, the heavy fabric still warm from his body. You rest now. I'll stay close by, till daylight. Ain't right for a woman and baby to face a night like this alone. Clara's lips trembled. Why are you being so kind to us? Luke glanced at the window where snow piled thick against the glass. Because I know what it's like to be left standin' alone in the cold. He tipped his hat, then moved to sit near the door, rifle across his knees, eyes steady on the fire. Clara rocked her baby, whispering softly, We're safe now, Samuel. For the first time in months she believed it. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Luke hum a low tune, something wistful and broken, like the sound of a heart learning to beat again. Outside, the storm howled on, but inside that tiny station, a spark of something new had begun to warm the night. The wind moaned across the frozen plains, battering the small station until its windows rattled. Inside, the stove glowed red with warmth, the only barrier between life and the merciless Montana night. Clara woke with a start. The storm still roared outside, snow swirling past the frosted glass. For a moment she forgot where she was, then she saw the man by the door. Luke Tanner sat in a wooden chair, hat tipped low, rifle resting across his lap. The firelight painted his rough features in shades of amber and shadow. Though his eyes were closed, he didn't look fully asleep, like a man who'd spent too many nights listening for danger. Samuel stirred in her arms, his tiny face pressed against her shawl. Clara rose quietly, feeding him from the small bottle she'd carried on the journey. When he finished, she laid him against her shoulder, humming the softest lullaby. Luke stirred, lifting his head. You get any rest, ma'am? Some, she whispered. But I'm afraid to close my eyes too long. The wind sounds hungry. Luke gave a small, knowing smile. Out here it's not the wind you worry about, it's what the wind hides. But don't fret. You and the boy are safe with me. He rose to his feet, stretching the stiffness from his limbs and moved to the stove. From his saddlebag he pulled a small tin and a bundle wrapped in cloth. "I didn't pack for guests," he said with a faint grin, "but there's jerky, a bit of bread and coffee if you don't mind it black." Her stomach tightened with hunger. "You're very kind, Mr. Tanner." He shook his head. "Just Luke, ma'am." "All right," she said softly. "Then you must call me Clara." "Clara," he repeated, the name warm on his tongue. "Pretty name." She smiled faintly, eyes lowering as she tore a piece of bread and chewed slowly, careful not to seem ungrateful. The two sat in companionable silence for a time, the crackle of the fire their only conversation. Outside, the storm screamed like a wild beast clawing at the walls, but inside the small depot, the world had shrunk to the golden circle of warmth around the stove. When the baby fussed again, Luke extended his arms. "May I?" Clara hesitated only a moment before handing Samuel over. Luke's large hands, rough and scarred from work, held the baby with surprising gentleness. He rocked the boy against his chest, murmuring something low and rhythmic, words she couldn't quite make out, but that sounded like comfort itself. "You've done that before," she said quietly. He didn't look at her, eyes fixed on the child. "Had a son once," he murmured. "Didn't live past his first winter." The words hung heavy in the room. Clara's breath caught, her heart twisting with sympathy. "I'm so sorry." Luke nodded once, his jaw tight. "My wife, Emma, she passed the spring after. Been just me in the land ever since." Silence filled the space again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, the kind that only two broken souls could share. When the fire began to die down, Clara rose to feed it more wood. Luke moved to help her, but she stopped him gently. "Please let me. You've done enough for us tonight." He stood back, watching her kneel by the stove, her face illuminated by the orange glow. Something stirred in him, a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in years. She looked so small yet so determined. A woman who had crossed miles of wilderness and heartbreak, and still held her child with steady hands. "Storm should ease by morning," Luke said quietly. "When it does, I'll take you into town, see if we can find word on this Thomas Reed." Clara stared into the fire, her face unreadable. "And if he doesn't want us anymore?" Luke paused. "Then you'll still have somewhere to go. I won't see you or that boy left out in the cold again." Tears shimmered in her eyes. She turned toward him, voice trembling. "You don't even know us. Why would you care so much?" He looked down at the baby in his arms, then back at her. "Because sometimes the Lord puts people in your path for a reason, and I don't aim to ignore it." The fire popped, a spark leaping into the air. Outside the wind howled, but inside it felt different. The fear hadn't vanished, but warmth had found a place beside it. Clara wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, watching as Luke sat back down, Samuel now asleep against his chest. He looked peaceful like that, gentle, steady, the kind of man who could shield a family from the harshness of the world. As the night deepened, Clara whispered softly, "Thank you, Luke." He looked up, his voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "Don't thank me yet, Clara. This land has a way of testing people. But we'll make it through the night." She smiled faintly, the exhaustion pulling at her eyes. "Then we'll face tomorrow when it comes." And with that, Clara drifted to sleep beside the stove, while Luke kept silent watch, his rifle close, his heart strangely full. For the first time in years, the lonely cowboy felt purpose again. And for the first time since her husband's death, Clara didn't feel alone. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something new was taking root, something tender, fragile, and alive. By morning, the world outside the little station was buried in white. Snow draped the land like a heavy blanket, glittering under a pale sun. The storm had passed, but its silence was almost as loud. Clara stood at the frosted window, her baby cradled against her chest. The air inside the depot had grown cold again, the stove now little more than embers. Her lips trembled as she exhaled, fogging the glass. Luke stepped up beside her, fastening the last button of his coat. "Tracks are gone," he said quietly. "Train won't be through here for days, maybe longer." She turned to him, fear flickering behind her eyes. "What should I do? I can't stay here. Samuel will freeze." Luke nodded, his jaw set. "My ranch is about 6 miles north. It's rough travel, but the horses can make it. You'll both be warm there." Clara hesitated, glancing toward the endless white beyond the window. 6 miles, in that? Luke's eyes softened. "You got my word, ma'am. I'll get you there safe. Both of you." Something in his tone, steady, unshakable, made her nod. The journey through snow. The cold bit at their faces as they stepped out into the open. The wind had calmed, but the snow was knee-deep in places, and the path nearly invisible. Luke led his bay horse, Dakota, by the reins, his breath misting the air. He turned to Clara. "Here," he said, holding out a hand. "Let me help you up." She lifted Samuel, wrapped tight in a quilt, then placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm but careful as he lifted her onto the saddle. Then he swung up behind her, his arms bracing protectively around her and the baby. "You hold on now," he murmured. "I will," she whispered, her voice nearly lost to the wind. They set off, hooves crunching softly through snow, the world silent but for the rhythmic creak of saddle leather. Pines rose like dark sentinels around them, their branches heavy with frost. After an hour, Clara's fingers were numb. Luke noticed and shifted his coat around her shoulders. "You tuck your hands under the baby's blanket," he said. "Keep him close." She obeyed, feeling his chest behind her, strong, steady, radiating warmth. For the first time in days she didn't feel afraid of the cold. "Do you live alone, Mr. Tanner?" she asked after a while. "Just me," he replied. "And 2 horses that eat better than I do." She smiled faintly. "No family?" He hesitated before answering. "Had one once. Lost them. Guess I just stopped looking for another." Clara's gaze fell to the snow ahead. "Then maybe you weren't looking. Maybe you were waiting that." Luke said nothing, but his arms tightened slightly around her. Arrival at the ridge. By the time they reached the ridge, the light was fading. The land sloped upward into a cluster of pine trees, and beyond them, a small cabin stood tucked against the mountainside. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin promise of warmth. Luke dismounted first, steadying the horse as Clara slid down carefully, clutching Samuel to her chest. Her boots sank deep into the snow. "This is your home?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Ain't much to look at, but it keeps the cold out and the wolves away." He led her inside, pushing open the heavy wooden door. Warmth wrapped around her instantly. The cabin was modest but tidy. A table, a hearth, a single bed pushed against the far wall, and shelves lined with jars of preserved fruit. A saddle rested near the door beside a pair of worn boots. Luke hung his hat and coat by the fire, then took Samuel from her arms with practiced ease. "There's an old cradle in the corner," he said. "Belonged to my boy. Been empty too long." Clara walked over, tracing her hand over the smooth wood. Inside, a little quilt, faded but clean, waited as though it had been placed there for her child. Luke set Samuel down gently, and the baby gurgled, his tiny fingers grasping the air. Clara's throat tightened. "He fits perfectly." Luke smiled faintly. "Some things find their way home even when you don't expect them to." She turned to him, eyes glistening. "You didn't have to bring us here. You've already done so much." He shook his head. "Ain't about what I had to do. It's what's right. And no woman or child should be left out in that kind of cold." He crossed the room, setting a kettle on the hearth. "There's stew from last night. It ain't fancy but it's hot." The smell of venison and herbs filled the cabin, rich and comforting. Clara sat near the fire, thawing her hands, watching him move with quiet strength. He wasn't a man who filled the air with talk, he simply did what needed doing. When he handed her a bowl, she met his eyes. "Thank you, Luke. Truly." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "You rest now, Clara. You're safe here." That night, the wind sighed outside, brushing the windows with ghostly fingers. Inside, the cabin glowed soft and golden. Clara sat by the cradle, humming a lullaby as Samuel drifted into sleep. Luke sat across the room, carving a small piece of wood with his pocket knife, a habit born of restless hands. After a while she spoke quietly. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" He looked up from his carving, his eyes thoughtful. "Used to. Don't much notice it anymore. The land talks if you listen close." She smiled faintly. "And what's it saying tonight?" He paused, gaze softening. "That maybe it's not so empty anymore." Clara's breath caught. She looked down at her sleeping child, then at the man across the room, the man who had found her when the world had forgotten her. The fire crackled softly, the snow whispered against the window, and for the first time since her husband's death, Clara felt warmth not just in her hands, but in her heart. Outside, the mountain wind carried the scent of pine and new beginnings. And inside, beneath the quiet flicker of the fire, a lonely cowboy and a forsaken bride began to find something neither had dared to hope for again. Home. The winter days stretched long and slow in the valley. Snow glistened across the ridge like scattered pearls, and each morning, smoke curled from Luke Tanner's chimney, sign of life, of warmth, and something new taking root. For the first time in months, laughter filled the small cabin. Soft, hesitant laughter, but real. A quiet morning. Clara stood at the window, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek as sunlight filtered through the frost. Samuel cooed in his cradle, clutching the wooden horse Luke had carved for him days ago. Luke came in from outside, dusting snow from his shoulders, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. He carried an armful of chopped wood, his movements easy and unhurried. "Morning, ma'am," he said with a small grin. "Fire's dying down. Thought I'd bring in a bit more before you freeze me out." Clara smiled, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. "You've been out there since dawn. You'll turn to ice if you're not careful." He set the wood down, wiping his hands on his coat. "Takes more than a little frost to stop me." Her eyes softened. "You really don't rest, do you?" He looked down, half smiling. "Not used to having someone to rest for." For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and in that glance, there was something quiet and fragile, like sunlight breaking through clouds after too long a storm. Clara turned away quickly, cheeks warm. "I made breakfast. Hope you don't mind porridge again." "Porridge beats goin' hungry," Luke said, settling at the table. "Besides, with you cookin', even plain oats taste better." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Flattery doesn't suit you, Luke Tanner." He chuckled. "Reckon I'll risk it anyway." The shadows they carried. After breakfast, Clara washed dishes while Luke mended a broken stirrup strap by the fire. Samuel slept nearby, bundled in blankets, the tiny wooden horse resting against his chest. The peace felt almost too perfect, too delicate, like something the world might take back if she breathed too loudly. "Luke," she said quietly after a while, "do you ever think about her? Your wife?" His hands paused mid-stitch. For a long time he didn't answer. "Every day," he said finally. "Not like I used to though. I used to curse the world for taking her. Now I just thank the Lord I had her at all." Clara set a plate on the counter, her voice gentle. "You must have loved her deeply." He looked into the fire. "I did. But I was a different man then, angry, prideful. Thought I could fight the land, make it bend to my will. When Emma and the boy passed, I figured it was punishment. Spent the next few years trying to outwork the pain." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "And did it help?" He shook his head. "Work keeps your hands busy, not your heart." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was honest. Clara turned to look at Samuel, sleeping peacefully. "My husband died when Samuel was barely 2 months old. He was a kind man, but sickness took him quick. After that, I didn't know where to go. The letters from Thomas Reed seemed like a lifeline." Luke's jaw tightened. "Man like that, promising safety then leaving you to freeze, ain't worth the dust on his boots." Clara smiled faintly, sadness in her eyes. "Maybe not. But if he hadn't written, I never would have ended up here." Luke glanced at her, then really looked at her. Maybe that was the Lord's plan all along. The small carving. That evening, Luke sat at the table, his knife scraping softly as he worked on another carving. Clara sat nearby, mending one of his shirts, the baby asleep once more in the cradle. "What are you making tonight?" she asked, watching the careful motion of his hands. He smiled shyly. "Thought Samuel could use a friend. Little horse shouldn't be alone." She laughed softly. "You're carving him a companion?" He nodded. "Seems only fair." For a long moment they worked in silence, each pretending not to notice the other's glances. The firelight danced across their faces, warm and steady, and the room felt fuller than it ever had before. When he finished, he handed her the small figure, a bear, round and strong. "For the boy," he said quietly. "So he grows up brave." Clara took it, her eyes glistening. "You have such gentle hands for a man who's lived so rough." He shrugged. "Sometimes gentleness takes more strength than fightin' ever did." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart fluttering in a way that scared her. Then she whispered, "You're a good man, Luke Tanner." He laughed softly, low and a little sad. "Don't know about good. But I'm trying to be better." A quiet realization. That night, when the snow fell again, softer this time, Clara stood by the window. The world outside glowed silver under the moonlight. Luke came to stand beside her, his presence warm and grounding. "Storm's easing up," he murmured. "You'll be able to get back to town soon." Clara's smile faltered. "Yes, I suppose so." He looked down at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Unless you'd rather stay." Her breath caught. "Luke?" He shook his head quickly, looking away. "I'm not a skin for anything. This house has been quiet too long. Feels different now. Feels like it's got a heartbeat again." She blinked back tears. "It feels like home." He looked at her then, eyes full of quiet longing. That's all I ever wanted it to be. For a moment neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Samuel sighed in his sleep. And somewhere deep inside both of them, something shifted, something they couldn't yet name but couldn't deny. As she turned away from the window, Clara caught sight of the two carvings, the horse and the bear, resting side by side on the cradle's edge. She smiled through her tears. "Seems they're not alone anymore," she whispered. Luke looked over, his voice low. "Neither are we." And for the first time since life had broken them both, they let themselves believe that maybe, just maybe, their hearts could heal together. Outside, the snow fell gently over the ridge, blanketing the world in white peace. Inside, two lost souls began to find the courage to love again. The snow had begun to melt along the mountain paths, turning the ridges into glistening rivers of thaw. Spring was whispering her promise through the pine trees. Inside Luke Tanner's cabin, warmth lingered, soft laughter, the smell of baked bread, the rhythm of new life. Clara had been there for months now. What began as refuge had turned into something deeper, an unspoken bond between two hearts stitched together by loss and quiet understanding. But peace, as Clara would soon learn, can be a fragile thing. A day that started like any other. The morning sunlight broke through the clouds, painting streaks of gold across the valley. Luke saddled his horse for a trip to town, needing supplies and nails for the corral. Clara stood at the doorway, Samuel in her arms, watching him tighten the reins. "You sure you don't want me to come?" she asked softly. He smiled, shaking his head. "You and the little 1V had enough of town folks staring and talking. I'll be quicker on my own." Her brow furrowed. "You shouldn't care what they say." He chuckled. "I don't. But I sure as sin don't like the way they look at you, like they're waiting to judge something they don't understand." Her eyes softened. "Luke Tanner, you can't protect me from everything." He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "No. But I'll protect you from what I can." For a moment, he hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but then simply touched Samuel's cheek and swung into the saddle. "I'll be back by nightfall," he said, and with a small wave rode down the trail. Clara watched until he vanished among the trees. The wind whispered through the pines, and for a while, everything felt calm. A knock at the door. By afternoon, the sun had dipped behind gray clouds. Clara was humming softly while folding laundry when she heard it, a knock at the door. She froze. Few came up this far uninvited. Carefully setting Samuel in his cradle, she crossed to the door and opened it. Her heart turned to ice. Standing there, covered in road dust and arrogance, was Thomas Reed, the man who had written her letters, promised her marriage, then left her stranded at the station. "Well, I'll be," he drawled with a smirk. "Didn't think you'd make it this far up the mountain. Looks like my little bride's got more grit than I thought." Clara's throat went dry. "What are you doing here?" He pushed his hat back, his eyes sweeping the cabin. "Came to claim what's mine. You sweetheart, and that baby of yours." "You have no claim over either of us," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Thomas stepped closer, his breath thick with whiskey. "Now don't go getting feisty. I paid the agency fair and square. You were supposed to be my wife. Left me looking like a fool in front of the whole town." Clara's eyes flashed. "You left me, Thomas? At the station. You watched me stand there with my baby while everyone stared. You never came." He sneered. "Changed my mind. You weren't exactly what the picture promised. But now I hear you've been living with a man out here? Folks in town are talking. I can't have that kind of shame on my name." Her hands balled into fists. "You don't have a name worth keeping clean." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You'll regret that." Before he could step forward, the sound of hooves echoed from the distance. Luke Tanner was home. The confrontation. The door swung open and Luke stepped in, the air shifting like a storm rolling through the valley. He took one look at Thomas Reed and his hand went instinctively to the revolver at his side. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why you're standing in my cabin." Thomas smirked. "You must be the mountain man folks warned me about. I'm just here to collect what belongs to me." Luke's eyes went cold. "Ain't a thing in this cabin that belongs to you." "Now don't get your hackles up," Thomas sneered. "The woman was promised to me. Got the letters to prove it. If she's been playing house with you, then I'll be taking her back, and the kid too." Luke took a slow, menacing step forward. "You think you can just ride up here and start claiming people like cattle?" Thomas scoffed. "I can do whatever I damn please." That was the wrong thing to say. In a heartbeat, Luke's fist connected with his jaw. Thomas stumbled back, crashing into the table. Dishes shattered. Samuel began to cry. Clara ran to the cradle, clutching her baby close as Luke towered over Thomas, fury etched deep into his face. "You come near her again," Luke growled, his voice low and dangerous, "and I'll bury you so deep in these hills the coyotes won't find what's left." Thomas spat blood, eyes narrowing. "You'll regret crossing me, Tanner. You don't own her." Luke leaned in close. "No. But I respect her. Something you'll never understand." With that, he yanked open the door and pointed to the trail. "Get off my land. Now." Thomas glared at them both, hatred flickering in his eyes, then stumbled out into the snow. After the storm. When the sound of hooves faded into silence, Luke turned back to find Clara standing by the hearth, tears streaking her cheeks. Samuel clutched to her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for any of this." He crossed the room in 2 strides and gently took her hand. "Don't you ever apologize for that man's sins." Her voice trembled. "You could have been killed." He smiled faintly. "Ain't the first fool I've had to teach respect." She looked up at him, eyes wide with emotion. "You didn't just defend me. You defended my dignity. No one's ever done that before." He brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his hand. "You and that baby deserve better than the way this world's treated you. And I'll keep standing between you and anyone who tries to hurt you." Clara's breath caught. For the first time she let herself lean into him. His warmth, his steadiness, the smell of pine and smoke and something safe. Luke wrapped his arms around her and Samuel, holding them both close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me hold you both," he murmured, the very words that had started everything. And in that moment, Clara knew she had found the home she'd prayed for, not in a letter or a promise, but in the heart of the man who refused to let her fall. Closing scene. The storm outside had passed, but inside, something new had bloomed, a peace born of truth, courage, and love. Luke looked toward the door one last time, where the tracks of Thomas Reed's horse disappeared into the woods. Then he turned back to Clara and Samuel, the firelight flickering across their faces. He whispered almost to himself, "Let him run. He's already lost what he'll never understand." And with that, the cabin filled once more with the sound of gentle laughter, the crackle of the fire, and the promise of something unbreakable between them. The days that followed the confrontation passed quietly, softly, like the world itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. The snow melted into rivers of silver, and wildflowers began to push through the thawing earth. Luke's cabin, once cold and empty, now hummed with the rhythm of family life. The sound of Samuel's laughter, the smell of biscuits baking, the low rumble of Luke's voice telling stories by the fire. Peace had returned to the mountain. But something deeper was stirring beneath it, love, unspoken yet undeniable. Morning in the valley. The dawn light spilled over the hills, soft and golden. Clara stood outside with Samuel in her arms, wrapped in a blanket. She watched the sun rise above the pine ridge, the air crisp and full of promise. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Luke stepped out, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair tousled from sleep. "You're up early again," he said, smiling. Clara turned, her cheeks pink in the morning chill. "I couldn't sleep." Samuel was restless. "He likes watching the sunrise." Luke chuckled, stepping beside her. "Smart boy. Knows a good view when he sees one." They stood there in silence, watching the valley awaken. The wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth. After a long pause, Luke said quietly, "Been thinking about fixin' the roof and buildin' that extra room we talked about." Clara glanced at him. "An extra room?" He nodded. "Figure the boy'll need his own space when he's older. Maybe even a garden out back. You said you missed tending flowers." Her lips parted slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're planning for a future, Luke?" He met her gaze, eyes steady. "I reckon I am." The proposal that wasn't planned. That evening, Luke came back from town with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Clara was setting the table when he placed it in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Something I've been meaning to give you," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Go on, open it." Inside was a simple silver locket, old but polished until it gleamed. Clara's breath caught. "Luke, it's beautiful." He looked down, suddenly shy. "Belonged to my ma. Been sittin' in a drawer too long. Figured it'd do more good around your neck than collectin' dust." She touched the locket gently. "I can't accept this." He took a small step closer. "You can if it means you'll stay." Her eyes widened. "Stay." He swallowed hard, his voice low but sure. "You and the boy, you've made this place feel alive again. Before you came, I was just workin', eatin', sleepin', waitin' for the years to take me. Now, every day's got a reason." Clara felt her heart twist in her chest. "Luke?" He continued, his voice trembling slightly. I ain't much of a man for fancy words. Don't got money or titles. But I got a heart that's yours if you'll have it. Marry me, Clara. Let me give you both my name and my life. Tears welled in her eyes. Are you sure you want this? A woman with a child that's not yours. He reached out and brushed his thumb against her cheek. That boy may not carry my blood, but he carries my heart. Both of you do. She covered her mouth, overcome. Then she whispered through her tears, Yes, Luke. 1,000 times yes. The wedding beneath the pines. A week later, the valley gathered quietly under the tall whispering pines. There were no grand dresses, no church bells, just a small gathering of neighbors, a preacher from the nearby town, and the song of the wind through the trees. Clara wore a simple cream dress, her hair braided with wildflowers. Luke stood beside her, nervous as a boy, his rough hands clutching a small silver band. When the preacher said, Do you take this woman? Luke didn't hesitate. I already do, he said, voice thick with emotion. Clara smiled through tears. And I you. When their hands met, the world seemed to still. The mountains stood witness as two broken souls found healing in each other's arms. And when the preacher said, You may kiss the bride, Luke did so gently, reverently, like a man who knew the worth of what he'd been given. The family forged in love. That night, as the fire burned low and Samuel slept soundly in his cradle, Clara sat beside Luke on the porch. The moon shone bright over the valley, silvering the fields. I used to think my life ended the day my husband died, Clara said softly. But now I see it just changed direction. Luke nodded. Sometimes God don't give us what we ask for, He gives us what we need. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And what do you need, Luke Tanner? He smiled, wrapping his arm around her. Just this. You, the boy, and the quiet of the hills. Clara opened the locket and slipped a tiny picture inside, one of Samuel and one of Luke she'd drawn herself. Then she closed it and whispered, Now it's complete. Until forever found them. Years later, travelers passing through the valley would sometimes glimpse a cozy cabin tucked near the ridge. Smoke curling from its chimney. The sound of laughter, deep, strong, and full of life. They'd see a boy riding a wooden horse his father carved. A woman tending a garden of wildflowers. And a tall man watching them with quiet pride. Luke Tanner's cabin was no longer a lonely refuge. It was a home, a place where love had conquered abandonment, where broken hearts had found their forever. And on warm spring evenings when the sun set over the mountains, Clara would sometimes turn to Luke, smile and whisper, Thank you for holding us when no one else would. He'd kiss her forehead and reply, I'll never stop. The wind would carry their laughter across the ridge, mingling with the whisper of the pines, an echo of a love that endured, gentle and strong as the mountain itself.